Okay, I still see people joining, but I guess we can get slowly started. So thank you all for joining this webinar on ensuring excellence in carbon credits and climate projects. This is the third session of our bite-sized webinar series on funding climate action. And after having learned about the role of carbon credits on the way to net zero in our June session and exploring carbon removals in our last month's webinar, today we will be talking about ensuring the quality in carbon credits. Indeed, lately the voluntary carbon market has been in the spotlight, and although everyone seems to be aligned on the fact that we have no time to lose and we desperately need more funds to be channeled into the green transition in developing countries, into new carbon removal technologies or the protection of our forests, there are still many questions around how the voluntary carbon market actually works, and for example, who is involved in the development of a climate project, how the certification process looks like, but also what the latest improvements are to increase the integrity of the VCM overall. So these are all questions we are going to look at today, but before we do so, just some brief housekeeping rules. So as usual, all the attendees will be on mute. If you do have any questions, please use the question box. There will be time for a Q&A session at the end. And with that, I would already like to present you today's speakers. So the speakers of this webinar will be Briony Cecil, the head of our portfolio project integrity team based in Munich, my colleague Tassilo von Rödern, sustainability advisor based in Berlin, and myself, sustainability advisor and key account manager based here in Zurich. And for those maybe who don't know us already, 2 words about South Pole. So South Pole was founded in 2006 by a group of university friends in Switzerland. And since that, South Pole has grown quite a bit. So today, South Pole is employing more than 1,300 people in more than 30 countries. And while the company has started as a project developer of climate projects, this is still very much part of our DNA. But the company is today also advising hundreds of companies worldwide on how to reduce their climate impact and meet their net zero goals. But let me hand over right away to Tassilo to get started with today's topic. The word is yours.
Thank you, Bettina. Let's dive right in. The discussion on integrity is not a new topic, but it's renewed focus and urgency on the topic. And indeed, in the last couple of months, there has been heightened media scrutiny. We, as in South Pole, consider this scrutiny as absolutely vital for a healthy and optimized carbon market, a market which is by design meant to evolve and improve with new developments in technology and best practice. And also developments need to happen so that buyers can more easily identify high integrity carbon credits. And many like us are already using the opportunity to double down on efforts to improve the integrity and quality of carbon credits. Ultimately, only a high integrity market will attract the finance we need for impactful climate mitigation projects. So, how does the evolution of the market relate to the topic of integrity? Overall, we can see that integrity in the past 2 decades has been impacted by trends in the economies and changing priorities. Starting point, as you can see on the left, was the early stage CDM 2005 to 2009. Back then, the carbon price was higher and projects were mainly in the industrial solutions like renewable energy, waste heat, etc. Those are projects with lower complexity on integrity and data reporting. But then between 2009 and 2013, the CDM and the voluntary carbon market launched community-based projects with very good mitigation potential. But prices crashed, and the low prices were a challenge to make projects viable. And more recently, with the market growing over 600% since 2019. Prices were rising significantly. And now project developers and other actors are catching up with bringing the quality needed so that the market can scale. And with Article 6, which enables parties to cooperate with their national determined contributions, integrity becomes even more a key topic in the market. There are different supporting bodies that help to achieve high integrity carbon credits. There are industry bodies, as you can see on the left, like the International Carbon Reduction and Offset Alliance, the ICRO. Those inform on credit integrity. Then there are certifications and standards, such as the gold standard, and together with project developers and project owners, these independent auditors uphold the credit integrity. And increasingly, governments, credit rating startups, and international programs are commenting on the credit integrity. You can see those on the right. And while the voluntary carbon market is not regulated, the displayed actors underpin the market and create standardization, and also they ensure real and measurable impacts from projects. So in order to provide confidence, there needs to be a high degree of urgency in all actors now. And there needs to be an alignment on a robust set of guidance as quickly as possible. Many of these organizations are working collaboratively, and they do this to ensure that their work is complementary and does not create any extra confusion. So there are a couple of key initiatives that South Pole uses that offer layers of integrity. Here today, we are going to focus on the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market, the ICVCM, because earlier this year, they released their new guidance for high quality carbon credits, the so-called core carbon principles, the CCPs. For the ICVCM stamp of approval, carbon credit certifiers such as Verra, Gold Standard, the American Carbon Registry have to demonstrate how their credits were generated. They also have to show with scientific methods how projects generate legitimate emission reductions or removals. And they have to adhere to rules on respecting the rights of indigenous and local communities. The first labels of the ICVCM will actually be released towards end of this year. And the ICVCM has joined forces with the VCMI, which is focused on the demand side integrity in order to build a trusted market. So the ICVCM is focused on the supply side, and the VCMI is focused on the demand side integrity. The VCMI wants to ensure credible and net zero aligned participation in the voluntary carbon market. And as a consequence of this, in many cases, they focus nowadays on claims made by businesses that buy carbon credits. Right, let's have a closer look at the core carbon principles from the ICVCM. The CCPs are a set of interlinked principles to define a threshold standard to ensure integrity. What does that mean? The CCPs are there to provide a credible method for identifying high integrity carbon credits. And also carbon credits must create real and verifiable climate impact, which is based on the latest science. The CCPs have generally been developed with input from hundreds of organizations throughout the voluntary carbon market. And I now want to highlight a couple of principles that are essential for the integrity of carbon credits. First of all, focusing on the emissions impact principles. There is the additionality principle. So the sequestration or avoided emissions must be additional to what would otherwise have been occurred without an intervention. Permanence. a very important one. Sequestration or avoided emissions must have durability against reversals, meaning the release of CO2 back to the atmosphere, usually for at least 100 years. There should be no double counting. So only one carbon credit can be associated with a single reduction or removal of 1 ton of CO2. There should be no double counting between projects and governmental GHG accounts. And this is also sustained by public available registries, where every carbon credit is given a unique serial number. Then there are the governance principles. For example, the transparency principle. The project program must provide transparent information on all credited mitigation activities. And the information shall be publicly available in electronic format. And there are the sustainable development principles, the sustainable development benefits and safeguards principle. This is advising on compliance procedures, on engaging with local communities, fair employment practices, acquiring land, and the benefit sharing mechanisms. And last but not least, the contribution to net zero transition principle. This is a rather obvious one. The project's activity should not support technologies that are incompatible with the transition to a net zero society by 2050. Yeah. So yeah, here I would like to hand it back to Bettina to take it forward.
Thank you, Tassilo, for sharing more information about who is informing credit quality. But we also heard that certification standards play a crucial role, a key role in upholding credit quality. And so many of you might be asking, what are the certification standards actually doing? So the certification standards, they establish the rules and the requirements and all the procedures for all the stages of the development of a carbon project, of the issuance of the credits, and also for the monitoring. At the same time, they establish, as we heard now, the requirements for the permanence, but for the various technologies, but also on how to demonstrate additionality. And last but not least, the certification standards manage the public registries of carbon credits, where you then eventually retire the credits once you purchase and once you use them. Now, as you may see on this slide, there are various standards, and the main standards and the most widely used ones are the Verified Carbon Standard, VCS, and the Gold Standard. Both of them are very similar and have very robust requirements, but they maybe have a slightly different approach or also, let's say, mentality. So the Verified Carbon Standard, here we're talking about 1,600 certified projects worldwide, is managed by Vera, a non-profit organization founded in 2005. And on the other hand, we have Gold Standard with 1,400 projects worldwide and launched in 2003 under the UN Clean Development Mechanism. In terms of difference, as we said, they're very similar, but maybe one could say if we wanted to define a distinctive feature or different approach, let's say both ensure and quantify co-benefits according to the SDGs. But for example, Gold Standard heavily focuses on co-benefits beyond emission reductions in developing countries and requires also to be there at least 3 per project. And there is also continuous monitoring of SDGs happening. And VCS, on the other hand, could maybe be said to have a wider scope in terms of technologies, as it has developed a wide range of methodologies, also of measuring cutting-edge emission technologies, such as blue carbon or soil carbon, for example. But overall, one can say that these 2 main standards do still have a rather similar approach. Then beyond that, we have regional and national standards. Here you can see some examples like the American Carbon Registry or the Woodland Carbon for the UK. And then we have technology-specific carbon standards, certification standards that focus on a specific technology, as for example, Puro Earth on carbon removals. But let's see what else certification standards are doing. So most importantly, they define what types of projects can be funded by carbon credits, and they develop the respective methodologies. So these methodologies then establish the rules and the requirements for the quantification of the greenhouse gas emission reductions or removals that can happen from a specific activity. These methodologies, they can be either developed by the standard itself, together also with industry experts, or by independent organizations, such as, for example, South Pole. But regardless of who develops a methodology, in any case, it must go through public consultations, through peer review panels, and also an audit process before they are approved. Once developed, these methodologies do also change over time. So it's not that they are set in stone forever, but they are revised as soon as new science or new best practice becomes available. And this can also be seen right now with the new carbon removal technologies. So right now, there is a growing number of methodologies coming up as these new technologies develop. And to give an example, South Pole, for example, last year wrote a methodology for biochar together with under the gold standard. But beyond the methodology, the standards do also define the process that projects must go through in order to be certified and to issue carbon credits. And as you may see on this slide here, there are certain milestones that occur only once during the project development and the initial registration. And then we have certain steps that occur regularly. For example, for each issuance, the emission reductions are verified by a third-party verification body. And these verification reports are also made available on the registries. So this way, it ensures that there is a repeating monitoring going on. The timeline for this process is very individual to each project and can vary, but it can take many years for projects to really go through the entire process and pass all the milestones. So where this is the general tasks and activities and roles that certification standards have. One of the most frequent questions is what the certification standards are doing beyond that. What are they doing to improve and further improve integrity? So probably this can be summarized under three main activities. So first of all, they are trying to continuously strengthen the process of the project development itself. So be it through third-party auditing at key milestones, open feedback loops for expert reviews or stakeholder consultations. But on the other hand, as we've seen before, they're also updating and developing new technologies, such as, for example, for carbon removals. But on the other hand, also retiring project types that maybe no longer meet the necessary criteria. That is something we will see just in a minute. And as third point, that is very important and where there's a lot of development going on is the testing and advancing best practice. So for example, the standards are also trialing new digital MRV systems to improve also the quality of the monitoring. As before, my colleague Tassilo has talked about the principles of the ICVCM. This is probably also the right moment to add that many standards are already working on aligning their processes with the improving best practices, with the improved best practice and initiatives like, for example, the ICBCM. But as I said, just let's have a look at some recent examples, because this could give you a more practical idea on what the standards are doing to improve the integrity, and on how they are, the methodologies are evolving over time. So for forest protection, the best example is the revalidation period. So this has been changed from 10 years previously to 6 years, which means that now a REDD+ project needs to undergo revalidation every 6 years. For community projects, on the other hand, the default baselines for the efficiency of cook stoves was increased, which means that if you consider an increased efficiency or baseline efficiency of the traditionally used cook stoves, this means that the efficiency gain from an improved cook stoves project is of course less, and therefore also less credits are being issued. So here we see that also the standards are taking greater precautions and are trying to apply a more conservative approach. In terms of renewable energy, the eligibility criteria were updated, and maybe here it is important to distinguish between the additionality we heard before and the eligibility. Eligibility means that this is the project that can be submitted. Then once they're submitted, you would still have to prove additionality. But in the past, all the renewable energy projects could be submitted, but now the standards have applied restrictions and have specified the criteria which renewable energy projects can be even submitted initially in the first place. So, for example, the VCS is only allowing renewable energy projects now from least developed countries, and also hydro, for example, is only feasible for small-scale projects. On the other hand, gold standard has also limited the countries in which it is possible to apply for renewable energy projects, and this foresees also a renewable energy penetration rate of below 5% in the country. Once the eligibility criteria are met, of course, you still have then to meet all the other requirements, as for example, the additionality requirements. And finally, as a last example, the tech removal, so the methodology for carbon capture, utilization and storage is in development. Here we have a lot of exciting developments going on the latest science and the new technologies. And with this, I would like to hand over to my colleague Bryony for a little deep dive into forestry projects.
Thank you, Bettina. So yeah, moving on to forestry. So South Pole has talked extensively over the last few months about the complexity as well as the urgent need for REDD+ projects, which play a critical role in protecting forests, but also preserving biodiversity and securing irrecoverable carbon to deliver rapid emissions reductions at scale. And the VCM architecture actually integrates baseline updates, technological advancements, and new learnings to evolve in tandem with best practices. And this evolution is pushing the envelope of best practice, and it calls for companies to keep directing finance to communities at the forest frontier through the REDD+ mechanism. So ultimately, we can't let perfection be the enemy of good. Next slide, please. Yeah, and there are different safeguards at each step of the development process. So for example, when establishing a baseline, project developers model future deforestation rates using methodologies approved by certification standards such as Vera. A similar area to the project is chosen as a reference, with factors such as roads and population increase built into the model, as well as satellite imagery, which is validated with on-site visits. The methodologies have feedback loops so that they can be updated thanks to new insights, technological developments such as drones and 3D imagery, as well as the evolving best practices. But there is always a degree of uncertainty when trying to predict the future, so these safeguards are in place. The emission reductions use a specific reference region as a baseline, and this baseline scenario, as Bettina said, is revalidated every 6 years for REDD+ projects by an external auditor, who check whether model deforestation rates match the observed rates, or whether the projects are transitioned to a new baseline. In the event of leakage or impermanence, for example, forestry projects are more susceptible to this due to natural threats and disasters such as forest fires. There is a buffer pool in place, and the buffer pool is determined by a risk analysis according to the rules of the particular standard, which set aside an amount of carbon credits that are not commercialized to ensure validity of the carbon credits that are being issued. If the observed deforestation is lower, then fewer credits will be issued. And similarly, if observed deforestation is higher, then more credits will be issued to finance additional activities. And finally, over the project's overall lifetime, the total number of climate action credits generated reflects the amount of emissions actually avoided. So from the end of the crediting period, emissions reductions must be permanent for at least 100 years. So South Pole has been closely following and helping to shape market best practice to ensure that we have clear safeguards and processes in place to translate best practice into action on the ground. And we are developing and improving our multi-layer quality assurance process throughout the project lifetime of our own projects to go above and beyond what is required by the certification standards. And this will include, for example, a tech strategy, risk criteria, due diligence, which includes KYCs, quick project assessments, full project assessments, and initial risk assessment and management matrices. In addition to annual quality control reports, which includes the risk assessment matrix reviews and updates, as well as monitoring and evaluation reports for complex projects and expert and/or peer reviews on deliverables, and additional auditing when required. Similarly, for any market procured projects, South Pole's internal experts within the portfolio project integrity conduct a thorough evaluation ranging from project participants, the technical and environmental integrity of the project, social impacts, as well as any reputational risks. So commenting now on the credit integrity relating to rating startups. So there are various startups popping up around the world, some of them listed here on the slide, which aim to evaluate different credits, including baselines, performance, as well as other characteristics, providing ratings on what they consider to be quality credits. And each rater develops their own evaluation criteria, typically aligned with best practice principles such as additionality and permanence. And these credits are typically evaluated and given a score against this evaluation criteria. It could be said that some ratings can lead to the enhancement of quality assurances from the certification standards, but for maximum impact, they should be harmonized with sound common principles. Cecilio touched upon this briefly earlier, so government and regulatory bodies within the VCM. So governments or governmental organizations, such as the United Nations, are often supported by various agencies or advisory groups comprised of industry experts, and they have the power to dictate who will need to offset their emissions, how many emissions need to be addressed, and what credits qualify. And these guidelines can be perceived as an indicator of what quality is. Government programs also approve certain credits, which can signal to the market, again, what is considered as quality. The ICAO is a UN agency directed by national governments. CORSIA is a scheme for addressing the CO2 emissions generated for flights between countries. The ICAO has approved certain credits for CORSIA, which can indicate to the market on what quality is again. However, there are still ICROA approved credits that are not under CORSIA, and similarly some CORSIA credits that are still not ICROA endorsed. So carbon credits are built on a foundation of robust principles, as we have seen earlier, with constant learnings and the latest proven climate science. And there is a lot of vital work being done to improve the integrity and quality of the carbon market. These developments will reduce confusion, overcome market fragmentation, but also give buyers confidence that they are funding projects that are making genuine impact on emissions. This is fundamental. A high integrity voluntary carbon market can further accelerate the uptake of emerging technologies, protect and promote nature and also biodiversity, and also put vital funding into the hands of the indigenous peoples and communities around the world who are critical stewards of our core carbon sinks. But also a high integrity voluntary carbon market is one important tool that can help finance the transition to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And while South Pole does not rate projects, we support the concept of ratings because it brings more transparency on project quality to buyers and other stakeholders. Rating startups are doing many things right when it comes to adding value, for example, to due diligence and overall benchmarking, but to align with the method of transparency and continuous improvement of the VCM, we advocate for a non-profit type organization that can define an objective and establish a harmonized and pragmatic approach around carbon project ratings. So what are we doing at South Pole in terms of quality and integrity? We have an additional layer of due diligence, which includes a thorough assessment and identification of project risks. And this helps then to bring greater transparency to our clients in order to avoid reputational risk. And this is in addition to what is set out by the standards. And we are constantly building upon our quality assurance framework, but also our integrity processes and policies in line with market developments. So what does our integrity consist of? When it comes to our holistic portfolio project integrity for market procured projects at South Pole, we look at various aspects. Our experts regularly review publicly available information and data, which is again additional and on top of what is required by certification standards. And such risks include, for example, the reputational, related to media articles, or to the social and community risks with regards to Indigenous rights abuses or even violations resulting from the project activities. So thank you for listening to our webinar, and we now invite you to ask any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. I see we have already received a couple of questions throughout the webinar. We would like to invite you to still post your questions while we answer the existing ones. They get into the queue. If for some reason we don't get to answer them now, we will answer them via email, so nothing gets lost. All right. Then I'd like to start with the first question we got, and the first question we got was actually on our Kariba project, South Pole's Kariba project. The question is, what happened in South Pole's Kariba project? What is happening right now? Yeah, I think Bettina, you're best suited to answer this one.
Yes, thank you for the question. We are starting immediately with a very interesting one. And you said, what happened to the Kariba project, right? Was the question. So I guess this is probably referring to the media attention we had related to the overestimation, or to the overestimation of the credit volume. And so maybe, I'm not sure if probably everyone is aware, but I will still just briefly say that, like, Kariba is a South Pole project in Zimbabwe of forest conservation. And the project is currently undergoing its first revalidation, as we heard actually earlier today, after 10 years, which is now 6, but back then it was still 10 years. And what happened actually was that, as we saw today, for a project, we always come up with a baseline, which means that we make assumptions on how, in this case, forest and the deforestation rate would have developed without the project. So we have a look at the historic deforestation rates and say, okay, without the project, these are the assumptions on how it would have developed. So it is not rare that deforestation rates develop differently than initially forecasted. We have it in both ways. So Nigeria, for example, is an example where we have constantly exceeding deforestation rates. And on the other hand, in Zimbabwe, over the last 10 years, the deforestation rate was less than expected, which is actually good news. There have been various reasons to that, also political ones. And what happens in such a case is actually that there is a mechanism under the methodology that is kicking in to ensure that only the real reductions occurred are actually also translated into credits. And that's actually what's happening also right now with our Kariba project. So it's being evaluated if there is a gap, and if any, the project will not issue any new credits until it was made up for that potential gap. But yes, indeed, that is a risk with a project that the standards are also trying to take care of under this methodology. So I hope this answers the question.
Thank you very much, Bettina. We have another question on permanence of carbon projects. So how is permanence of at least 100 years ensured for emission reductions? I think, yeah, Brian, this goes to you for sure.
Sure, good question. Perhaps we can take the nature-based projects as an example, as we talked about nature-based and forestry projects just now. So nature-based sequestration projects face the potential for reversal if the stored carbon is released back into the atmosphere. So there are unavoidable reversals that result from uncontrollable natural events like forest fires, disease outbreaks, or even drought. And then you have avoidable reversals, on the other hand, that result from controllable activities, for example, land conversion or overharvesting. So to ensure the 100-year permanence, there are mechanisms in place. For example, the standards require the monitoring and verification for a period of 100 years following the issuance of any offsets. Or, as we mentioned earlier, having this buffer pool, which provides a sort of insurance against reversals of greenhouse gas reductions and removals due to unavoidable causes. So, for example, if a nature-based carbon offset project aims to remove 100,000 tons of carbon per year, the project might allocate 10,000 of these tons to this buffer pool, so making them unavailable for trading or purchase on the voluntary carbon market in the event of an unavoidable reversal. So for example, this year we had many forest fires. Then this buffer pool is then used for such an instance where these trees might have been affected from forest fires.
Thank you, Bryony. There's another question on risks, which is, are there still risks even when adhering to best practice in buying carbon credits? I can take that one. I would say, like most investments, the purchase of carbon credits is not 100% risk-free, and I would say the purchase of carbon credits can be seen as an investment. It's still a relatively young space which is developing. There is new technologies which give us as South Pole the opportunity to fine-tune the processes, and yeah, also what's best practice today will not necessarily be best practice tomorrow. And we as South Pole strongly believe that actually risks are necessary to catalyze the change, and action really is better than no action. And the voluntary carbon market is a well-functioning method to transfer money to the global south, to save ecosystems. And yeah, obviously there still is risk, but if you adhere to permanence, if you look in projects to transparency, then you should be relatively fine. Yeah. We have received a couple of other questions, for example, one on renewable energy. Renewable energies have access to other financing instruments. How can credits from wind farms or solar plants meet additionality requirements? That's a question we get relatively often, especially here in Europe. I think Bettina, you're well suited to answer this one.
Goes a bit into that what I was talking about under the renewable energy part. So, but I think this is more, there's, as we said, there's the eligibility criteria, right? And that is more about additionality, right? About the fact that does the project really need this additional revenue from carbon credits in order to be viable? And I think I fully agree that there are now the situation has changed over the last 10 years also, or 10-15 years, that now renewable energy projects are also bankable without this additional income. But many projects that were registered back then have been realized only because or have got additional financing only because they could show the future income from carbon credits, and that's why they were actually financially viable. And also today, for new credits, for new carbon credits from renewable energies, it depends on the location, on the geography, but also the scale of the project. So still today, there are renewable energy projects that need this income. And so this is also something that the standards are trying to reflect with this change in the eligibility criteria.
Very good, thank you. Then we got a question on carbon credits and wildfires. What happens to carbon credits when wildfires burn down a project? How much is it possible to factor wildfire risk into projects? And can you touch on what you mean by retiring a credit? I think we largely answered that already on our slides on forestry projects and also in previous questions. Bryony, is there anything you want to add on that questions on wildfires?
No, I think we mainly covered it with this buffer pool, that there is, an allocation of credits to this buffer pool to account for any loss. So, yeah.
Very good. All right.
Maybe the last part of the question, like what do you mean by retiring a credit? Maybe we could just briefly add that. So the retirement of a credit from the registry is that when it is used or purchased, it is retired in the name of a company, and it makes sure that a credit, each credit can be used only one time. So that is also one of the principles that Tassilo explained earlier on. Just a little add-on.
Thank you, Bettina. I think unfortunately we hit the time. It's 10:46. I would like to thank you for your time. Thank you for attending. Thank you for posting questions. Any unanswered questions will be answered by email. And we hope that we see you in our next webinars coming up. The next one is on the 27th of September on local solutions for global challenges, regional climate action projects, and their impact. Thank you.